Hey, good morning, everybody. It is great to see you on this beautiful Sunday morning. I'm so glad you're able to join today. I encourage you to comment. It's a great way for us to know who's here and to connect with each other, but also share your ideas this morning. Hi, Roxy. It's just always so good to see you guys, and we are noticing, when you check in. It's great to see you. This is a difficult morning for a lot of people because it seems like Saturday mornings tend to be days that we hear difficult, crazy things. And yesterday is no exception. What is happening in our country with violence and what we are taking abroad is a bit overwhelming, to say the least. It's quite extraordinary and it horrible. Okay. We did get an email from, we meaning all of us as United Methodist clergy in Minnesota and North Dakota and South Dakota, got an email from our bishop, Lynette Planbeck, yesterday. And she addressed the issue of the United States attacking Iran. And she reminds us of something, the United Methodist social principles. I mentioned this to you because the United Methodist Church has a set of social principles, and they're really good guidelines. It's one of my favorite things about this church, the organization that we're a part of. But here's what Bishop Planbeck says as a part of her email. She says, the United Methodist Church deplores war and all other forms of violent conflict and urges the peaceful settlement of all disputes. We yearn for the day when there will be no more war and people will live together in peace and justice. And then she says, with her own words, as United Methodists, Christ followers in the Wesleyan tradition, we reject war as an instrument of foreign policy and insist that every peaceful and diplomatic means be exhausted before armed conflict begins. At the same time, our tradition recognizes the deep moral struggle Christians have faced for centuries regarding military service. We honor those who serve out of conviction. We honor those whose conscience leads them to pacifism. And we commit ourselves to care for all who are affected by war. Just wanted you to know where the United Methodist Church stands on all of this in Minnesota, and I'm in alignment with this. I agree. War is the last possible resort, and this violence is not okay. I don't think it's what God would call for. So before we go further, I just want to pray about this with you. So please pray with me. Gracious God, may your will and your ways be done. May this world be someday healed and made whole, and may we be a part of it. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to continue on today. I didn't rewrite my sermon because I actually think that what I plan to do today is relevant to all of this, the whole big picture. And I'm shifting gears from last Sunday's sermon where I had a chance to share with you some things that I learned on a 2-week vacation because that would be kind of tone deaf at this point to go any further with what I learned on vacation when so much is happening right now in our world. So I want to talk about this in reference to the season of Lent. During the season of Lent, that's a time for self-examination and thought. And one of the important questions that is continually coming up is, why did Jesus get executed? And would we do it again? Now, there's this painful time right in the whole narrative of the Bible, and Mark 15:1 is one of the places right where we see it. It's where the on the ground decision making happens. It says, as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation. Chief priests meaning religious leaders of the day for the Jewish people, with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. So why? Why did this happen? And would we do it again? I kind of think we would. And I kind of think perhaps we already are. to some extent. Now, I want to talk about this on an earthly, down to earth level, like the literal reason on the ground for why it happened. I am aware, however, that there are multiple spiritual implications of Jesus' crucifixion, death, and resurrection, multiple spiritual ideas about this. The most common spiritual idea about this would be regarding substitutionary atonement, meaning Jesus took our place on the cross, and then therefore we can be offered peace with God because of Jesus' sacrifice. But I need you to know that's not the only belief about the crucifixion at all. There are multiple ideas about this. In fact, Michael's going to share a link with you here. This is a really great podcast to get you started. If you're a little worried that your belief in this might be challenged, I actually encourage you even more to listen to it because new ideas are actually really helpful, I think. It's by Jennifer Bashaw, and it's through the Bible for Normal People. It's called What Did the Crucifixion Do? Now, she's dealing with the spiritual implications of the crucifixion. Today, and actually, let me add, if you want to have a conversation with me about the spiritual implications of the crucifixion, I would love to talk. Sit down. It'd be even better if we were in a group because, man, to me, it's just fascinating. But on the ground, again, Jesus in person standing there, why did they kill him? I mean, he was offering love and peace and a better way of life, right? Well, I think the biggest reason why they killed him is because a better way of life sometimes requires that systems change. It requires change. And I don't think they had a tolerance for the change that Jesus was asking them to make. Look at Jesus' very own words, Luke 12. You'll recognize some of this. Listen to what Jesus says about what it's going to take for them to get to a world in which things are better. Okay? Listen to what he says. He says, I have come to cast fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already ablaze. Did you know this was in here? Yeah, Luke 12. And then he says, I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. Isn't that a super weird sentence, a weird way to say it? What does he mean by saying this? Jesus is actually being kind of funny here. It's a play on words in the original language. He's saying, I have an unfinished project, but it really literally, it means I have a dunking to be dunked, which is, okay, whatever, Jesus being funny. Jesus continues, do you think I have come to bring peace on the earth? Well, yeah, that's what we thought. But I think this has to happen first. No, I tell you, but rather division. These are Jesus' words, okay? There's a parallel passage to this in Matthew 10. The same idea is quoted, but in this passage, it's something you'll recognize. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. That verse right there is taken out of context to recruit for ICE and multiple other things. It's caused a lot of pain, a lot of problems. That is not what Jesus meant. He did not mean violence. Listen to what he actually meant. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided. 3 against 2 and 2 against 3, they will be divided. You see this? And this is how he describes it. Father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. This is how Jesus describes the division that will occur. Notice, all of these relationships would have been unequal relationships at that time. And many of those relationships are still unequal today. But this was a very, very patriarchal society, a very hierarchical society. We have cultures like that now. And these people should not have been in disagreement at all. I think that Jesus is saying that he has come to change the way they treat each other. And this way of love will disrupt and destroy their social hierarchy, including patriarchy. Jesus is saying everyone's going to have a voice and an opinion now, and they're going to talk about it, and they're going to question Their parents? Yeah, this is what Jesus is saying. He is not declaring that he will incite physical violence. We don't see that in any of Jesus' teachings at all. So he's saying, I'm going to disrupt your hierarchy and I'm going to bust up the patriarchy. He also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, it is going to rain. And so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be scorching heat. And it happens. Basically, you're able to predict the weather, right? And then he says, you hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? In other words, I know you can see what's needed to bring in God's ways and God's kingdom. It's obvious. It should be obvious to them at that time. But it wasn't. I want you to hear how Eugene Peterson puts this in the Message paraphrase. Thank you, Vonda. It's good to see you. We need to talk soon, okay? Luke 12 from the Message. Listen, he says, I've come to start a fire on this earth. How I wish it were blazing right now. This is Jesus. I've come to change everything, turn everything right side up. There's so much reference in the Bible about how the last will be made first and the first will be made last. The mountains and the hills made low. Prepare the way of the Lord. Remember how I long for it to be finished. Do you think I came to smooth things over and just make everything nice? Not so. I've come to disrupt and confront. And then he turned to the crowd. When you see clouds coming in from the west, you say, storm's coming, and you're right. And when the wind comes out of the south, you'll say, this will be a hot one, and you're right. Frauds. You know how to tell a change in the weather, so don't tell me. You can't tell a change in the season, the God season we're in right now. And you know what? I'm not going to call you a fraud today, but I am going to say this is a very high potential season for people who are following Jesus in the ways of love. It's emerging everywhere. This is a high potential season for us to bring about the ways of change. And look what's happened in Minnesota over the last months. We'll talk more about this. Jesus is announcing that they are living in a critical time, a great opportunity for love, justice, and equality to prevail. And it's because he's there with them. But Jesus is saying that this God season will require a lot of difficult change, starting with disrupting and even overturning their hierarchical, social, and political structure. Did you get that? He's saying the relationships are going to be disrupted and changed because they have to be in order for justice to happen. You can't have justice for all people when some people are deliberately pushed down and kept down. You have to break the system that presses people down and out. You have to break the system that allows people to take and hoard power and crush people in the process. You have to get rid of that system. Now, Jesus' words were really important during that time because what was happening in the whole area in Jerusalem was largely related to this occupation they were experiencing from Rome. The Jewish people, the Israelite people of that time, were so oppressed by the Roman hierarchy and the Roman government. I want you to look at what a guy, Kurt Willems, says about this. This is important, and it's important for our context today. You will probably hear a lot of things that ring a bell right now in our culture and our time. Listen to this. During the first century, sorry, let me get a drink here. I'm going to talk myself right through my voice today. During the first century, Rome had dominion over Israel. In 63 BCE, now 63 years before Jesus, okay, 63 years, that's a couple generations at least, right? After much turmoil and civil war within Israel, so they were infighting and beating each other up, the Israelites were, they'd done that before, right? The Romans invaded. When they were fighting each other, the Romans invaded and conquered Jerusalem. In order to keep control over the Galilean and Judean peoples, Julius Caesar and the Senate installed Herod as king. This is the Herod you hear about. It would take Herod 3 years to finally gain control over the still hostile Jews, but he would, in due course, keep a firm rule over the whole region. He eventually became one of Augustus' favorite military leaders, and was admired by the new emperor because of his immense development program. So, imperial building and empire creating. Not only did Herod expand the temple in Jerusalem to be more grandiose and Hellenistic Roman in style, but he also imposed a sacrifice that priests would give on behalf of Rome and the emperor. Get this? He took the church and he forced them to offer sacrifices to Rome and to the emperor. Do you see how that should have been offensive? Additionally, Herod had whole cities named to give reverence to Caesar. So he changed the name of things to make sure that Caesar's name was on it, as well as imperial temples and fortresses to reinforce Roman control. The great building campaigns were not possible, though, without taxing the people of Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. These are the Jewish people, the Israelites, who were being occupied by Rome, leaving the majority in poverty. You got this? So in order for Herod to build his kingdom in this area, he had to take a ton of money from them. And that left them in a terrible situation. Not only, however, were they required to pay taxes to the empire, but they continued to function as a temple state and were also required to pay the tithes and sacrifices of the Jewish religion. Thanks for sharing. This article is really good by Kurt Willems. I encourage you to read that if you're curious about all this. I just thought it was great. But do you get what's happening here? They're being forced to honor Herod and Caesar as a god-like being and pay them taxes, and their church required that they pay too. The offensiveness of being forced into what could be labeled idolatry, for sure, worshiping Caesar, along as the difficult economic reality must not be understated. The Jewish people of that time were deeply, deeply oppressed, and they were living in horrible poverty, and they were double taxed, which caused massive poverty. Both the Roman government and their own temple leaders, these are their leaders of their religion and their faith, required payment. Jesus pushed against Roman dominance over the Jewish people, but he offered his harshest criticism to those Jewish religious leaders that worked the middle of the time, specifically the Pharisees and Sadducees. You've probably heard their names before. Why? Because the religious leaders of that time, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, decided to cuddle up to the Roman Empire. That's how they saved themselves. They partnered with the empire in this overtaxation of the people. They used God and made rules about it stronger to extract money from people and to maintain their position of power. Now, do you see why Jesus was mad at them? Because they partnered with the government. And the government and the Jewish religion got all mixed up together. And because of that, people were just demolished. They couldn't afford it. They couldn't do it. So when Jesus started loving people, offering hope for a better future, and there it is, in God's kingdom ways, he threatened the wealth and power of his own religious leaders. Because see, these Pharisees and Sadducees had figured out that ponying up to this government allowed them to be in the position of power that they had. They had wealth. They had lots of money. And so partnering with this evil empire, they got to hold their position of power and wealth. All of this is wrong. None of this is what God asked of people at all. Yes, Cindy, it is. The way of love will always threaten people that take unjust power over others and use their position to hoard wealth. Always. And why is that? Because when we start treating each other with love and respect, when we start learning about each other, our empathy goes off. And we just can't allow the injustice anymore. We can't. It has to change. So, what do you think? Why was Jesus crucified in that day and age? Simply put, I think of it like a Jenga game. Think about how those blocks are all stacked up. Jesus poked at all of those blocks. He destabilized the system of hierarchy and patriarchy that the church leaders were using to gain power and wealth for themselves and keep it. They wanted to keep the money they had, the power, the land they had. So, in order to protect the system and their position in it, Jesus had to go because he was poking holes in their plan. See why he was mad? These ladies, Jeza and Rachel, who do spiritoutspoken.com, listen to how they say this. Jesus wasn't executed for loving people. He was executed for confronting power, and that power was deeply religious. See, and so I would say he was executing for confronting power because confronting power is what love needs to do. It's what love really requires of us. They talk about this in a few ways, and these are the things I'm going to talk about over the next weeks and through this season of Lent. They talked about in this article, and this is all over Jesus stuff. Jesus called out the religious leaders for their religious hypocrisy, for their weaponization of religion to take money, for their performative spirituality and their profiting off God and more. I'm going to dig these up over the coming weeks because I actually think this is super interesting. See, do you see why Jesus was so, yes, Jan, thank you. Yes, they did not want to lose power. And Jesus was challenging that. Jesus was poking holes in their system and causing people to question because he was eliminating the hierarchy. He was actually allowing women to talk. He was letting children come to him. He was speaking to people. He was touching people who were ostracized. He was working with people and helping them to have hope. And that scared the people who had the money and the power because they didn't want to lose their money and power. So I want to slow down, though, for just a minute. I want to offer a lot of grace to these Sadducees and Pharisees because it can be really easy to make them out as bad guys. And some people have used this kind of thinking to branch over into anti-Semitism, and that's not what I'm talking about here at all. But I want to slow down on the harsh criticism of the Sadducees and Pharisees that I and many other people offer, okay? Because the system developed over a long period of time. We saw that 63 years before Jesus was born, and it was prior to that, really. Well, that's when Rome came along. This was through several generations, and it's very possible that they did not realize how much privilege they had. And you think, how could they not? Well, if you never see people who are really struggling, you don't necessarily have a good idea that they exist, right? Or how hard life was for people who they'd been taking advantage of, who were living in poverty. I know pastors who are working with their churches in hopes of getting them engaged in helping people in their community. And yet the people in the churches that they serve are denying that there are people in their community who have need. They don't even see it. Our minds and our eyes and our thoughts tend to look away from things that make us uncomfortable or challenge our systems. And seeing people in poverty and struggling is a challenge to our system if we have privilege, if we have more than we need. We don't always realize the power that we hold or the privileges that we have embedded in our system. I should have quantified what the word we is there, really, now that I see it on the screen in front of me. Some people have in our system. It's not all of us. I'm not assuming you're all a white person like me. There are a lot of people who have a lot of privilege right now. A lot. We can't always see it. We can't always see how we work to protect that power either. Like the religious leaders of Jesus' day, we may even use God to keep the system in place, retaining our privilege and power over others. And frankly, I think we are awakening to the amount of privilege we have as people have with white skin right now because of what's happening with immigration in the United States. Certainly here in Minnesota, heard a lot of people say, I had no idea what it feels like to be afraid of our own government. And then people of color saying, well, we've known for a long time, y'all. We don't even really comprehend it until it actually touches us. And so what if the Pharisees and the Sadducees just didn't really see it? They were just removed from it. They didn't really realize how hard it would be. They were generations away from any kind of difficulty. Christian nationalism does this. It uses the Bible, to try to justify the way our government is treating immigrants right now. And they use this to retain their power and their privilege. And the believers of Christian nationalism, many of them at the core, even see equality and equity, and certainly empathy, as something that is dangerous to our way of life, threatening them. And I think it's because of their privilege and position and power. This is showing up right now. They can't see what they're doing. And when people who hold those kinds of beliefs are challenged by something that really should evoke empathy in their hearts, they often push back against that harder and harder, because the fear of their system having to change is more frightening than letting another person be hurt. We protect the systems that give us power. We'll even build them bigger and higher, even if they crush people under it. There's this pastor guy who I follow. His name's Jeremy Jernigan. I love what he says. He says he's a recovering megachurch pastor. There are a lot of people in that realm, recovering pastors. He says some really interesting things. He says, when we benefit from the way things are, it's harder to realize that something is broken. And I want you to think about this on a broader scale, not just people of color right now with immigration, but let's talk about this. I mean, the generation that could believe in the American way and the American dream and all of that. Wow. Look at some statistics about how hard it is right now for I'm 59, our kids to make it financially. Look at what's occurring out there in the world. And just because we grew up with all this possibility, when college was $1,000 a semester or something, we grew up with all this possibility. We assumed that's still happening. The system helped us and benefited us and built it, but it's not that way for young people right now. The system's broken. But because it worked for us, it's harder for us to see that it doesn't work for everybody. He also said, when you've been well fed by the system, it's harder to notice the hunger of others. I think this is why, as people of God, we're called to step out of our comfort zone, to engage with people, to really, let's let Jeremy Jernigan say a little bit more about the difficulties of privilege, okay? I want you to hear some of his words. Now, his wife's voice is loud because she's closer to the camera, but listen to what he says.
Jerry, I have a question. I'm going to quote you to you. You said, when you've been fed well by the system, it's harder to notice the hunger of others. And then a few sentences down, it says, it whispers that the world must be okay because your world is okay. It lulls us into thinking that peace is the absence of conflict rather than the presence of justice. And how would you relate that to what we're seeing right now in the world?
So it's the idea of privilege and my book's really coming out from the point of view of when you are the one with privilege, it serves as a blinder to a lot of what's happening around you. And people even with this is like, well, they're only going after illegal immigrants is kind of the language. And it's like, no, they're going after people with the least amount of privilege first, and then it expands outward. Like that's how this always works. And what happens is people usually don't care until it hits their privilege. And what I'm inviting people to realize is like you can actually care about people way before it ever affects your privilege. And that's actually, if you want to follow Jesus, that's like the most Jesus looking thing to do. But if you just want a better society, that's how you get it, is you start caring about people, not because it negatively affects you, but because it negatively affects someone. And when others are negatively affected, we're all negatively affected. And so getting to see privilege is just a blinder to justice. And you're seeing it right now where, your take on ICE is probably a real good indicator of your view of privilege and justice.
Yeah, you say when we benefit from the way things are, it's harder to realize something is broken. Privilege numbs perception.
And sadly, this is what we're seeing with a lot of Christians. Like,
comfort dulls compassion.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't be doing it, or they should just get their papers in line. And it's just a tone deaf, I'm going to bury my head in the sand and not look at the pain happening around me. And privilege will jack you up and jack up your perception of the world.
Jerry, I have a question.
What do you think about that? Privilege shapes our view of the world, but the call of Christ is empathy. It's going to people. It's seeing the world through their eyes. Remember these words he said. When we benefit from the way things are, it's harder to realize that something is broken. And so I'm going to look at those Pharisees and Sadducees and say maybe they just couldn't see it. Maybe they couldn't see it. Maybe they saw it later. We know Nicodemus did. At some point, maybe. Maybe they saw it. And when we've been fed well by the system, it's harder to notice the hunger of others. But the way of love really does ask us to examine ourselves, to discover and deal with the things that cause others harm, even if we don't realize them. The way of love asks us to consider what systems we're benefiting from and who's getting crushed underneath. The way of love asks us to discern our thoughts, our views, our position, the system we're trying to uphold and maintain really carefully, because Jesus came to break those systems of injustice. And if as followers of Jesus, we're perpetuating those systems of injustice, we need to change. We need to learn. We need to do things differently because we're willing to see and value and love other people. See, love calls us to change. It calls us to do things differently. And ultimately, God says that the kingdoms of this world will be toppled. This is what Jesus intends for us to do too. So why? Why was Jesus crucified? Because he asked them to change. Perhaps they couldn't see the need for change. Perhaps they could, and they just didn't want to give up their position or their power or their money. What really strikes me about it, though, is that even people without position and power and money resisted the changes Jesus was bringing. Because I guess maybe they get comfortable in their position, even if it's low. At least they had food, maybe. But even if it's low. And then there are people who are going to resist change no matter what. Think about it, guys. Would we take out Jesus today? Would we do it again? I don't know. I like to believe I'm the kind of person who, no, I would see Jesus, I would get it, I would run to Jesus, I'd be a disciple, but would I? I'd have a lot to lose by dropping my net and following. Would we do it again? I'm not sure. I think this season of Lent is a great opportunity for us to really look at things. Because with the brokenness of our world and the violence that we're continuing to see, because of all of that, if we're going to be followers of Jesus, if we're going to love our neighbor to bring the cause of Christ into this world, then we need to be really intentional and really careful about how we do this, what our attitudes are beneath it, our motivations, our mindsets. We need to be really, really careful because this is a season similar to what Jesus was talking about in his day, in which there is a lot of opportunity to love neighbors and to bring hope into this world. We need to think it through. We need to be always wondering, so why did they kill Jesus? And would I do it again? We'll keep processing through the coming weeks, and I don't know how long, possibly a long time, because there's plenty to talk about on this subject. I hope I have brought something to your awareness today or challenged you in some way. You know, I feel this like pull to comfort you. And I want to share with you that the kingdoms of this world will fall. That's why that slide's at the end. But I really feel like this is a time for us to be not just comforted in the chaos of this world, but also challenged. We have a chance now to really make change, or we're praying that soon we will. That's my hope, that it's possible. So take care, everybody. As always, I say it every week, get involved. Get involved in good things, things that bring joy, bring things that bring hope to all of us. Get involved in good things and take care, take care. Reach out if there's something you want to talk about or deal with. I'd love to talk with you sometime soon. But much love to all of you. Be safe, keep being hopeful, and I'll see you soon.